Hi, and welcome to my podcast, What's the Worst That Can Happen, hosted by myself, Abby Whitaker. In this podcast, we are going to talk about all things business and exactly what it takes to take the leap, how to grow your business, and all the little things in between. So for today's episode, which is my first ever episode, we are going to talk a little bit more about my journey and a conversation I had at the start of my journey that has absolutely changed the way that I approach business. So I'm really excited to share that with you. And then from there, I'm going to run through 5 tips that I would give to anyone thinking about starting a business. All right. So as I said, this is my first episode. I am a little bit nervous, which is always a good thing, right? Nervous energy and excited energy are in the same field, and it just means that we care. So I obviously care so much about this. It is something that I've been thinking about for years. I actually thought about doing a podcast about 4 years ago, and it never came to life. It wasn't quite the right time, and I just wasn't quite 100% sure on what I wanted to do. But now I feel so sure and so ready to share with you. So let's go on this journey together and let's jump right into it. So what's the worst that can happen? It sounds like a bit of a funny name for a podcast, but I absolutely love it. And the reason for this is that every time I talk to someone about business and every time I explore business ideas, I always explore what's the worst that can happen. Sometimes we get so in our head about what can happen or how our business is looking that we don't actually think that probably the worst case scenario is survivable, it's not going to be the end of the world, and it's potentially worth the risk. All right, so let's jump right into it. So a little bit about me and my background. I now have got 6 businesses. So I have got 3 Pilates studios. I've got a 4th one opening next month. I've got a teacher training academy, and I've also got an app. On top of that, not as a official company or business, I do mentoring and some programs and things like that to help other people in business as well. So I started my first inflow business 5 years ago. However, I did have a couple of businesses before. I've been born into a very entrepreneurial family, and I always kind of dabbled in little things as a 6-year-old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old. We used to go to the reject shop and we would buy lollies, like in bulk, and then we would go around the neighborhood and we would sell them to make a little bit of extra pocket money. So we were always very encouraged to take our initiative and think of ways to do things outside the box. My second business was a car washing business, and I was also a little bit of a handy woman. So when I was about 10, I used to go around our neighborhood and clean people's cars for $10 inside and outside. And also I did odd jobs. I remember helping this couple paint their fence for like $10, and it was like a full day in the sun. But yeah, I always did that. I saved up my money and probably just went and spent it on things like Dolly or Girlfriend. But we love it. We love to see it. And I think that was something that was always encouraged for me growing up. After I'd finished uni, I started to dabble a little bit in a different business that wasn't inflow, which was a digital marketing business. It was called This Is Digital, and it was everything digital marketing, using my marketing background and also the experience I had in the field. I built websites for people as well, and yeah, it was kind of like a fun little thing. It wasn't something that I was super passionate about, so it didn't really take off. In the midst of doing that, I also had a charity called the Orphan Project. It was a completely registered charity, and basically I used to paint I used to sell my paintings, and 100% of those profits would go to the charity directly into Africa to an orphanage that I had worked with there, and would go directly to the kids. So buying school shoes, buying blankets during winter, buying food, supplies, everything you can think of. So I always dream big, and then one day my husband and I decided that we really wanted to move to the Sunshine Coast. So we packed our bags with a dream to start a Pilates studio. We had already started looking at some locations, and we had already done a lot of our due diligence. However, there was a conversation that happened prior to us packing our bags, which probably changed the trajectory not only for myself, but also for my husband. And this was a conversation I had with my mum and dad. So, like I mentioned, my mum and dad have always been very supportive and very entrepreneurial. Jordan and I had spoken about a few business dreams, including a location in Fiji where we ran workshops for young kids, like teenagers, amongst other things. I mean, we have spoken about crab shops, wellness centers, Pilates studios, anything you can think of, we have discussed and explored. But the one that stuck, or that we kept coming back to, was this Pilates studio idea. We both had worked in the industry, Jordan in sales and myself in marketing and instructing, and we thought that the business model was pretty cool. So we had done all the numbers and it was all looking pretty good, but obviously it was a big risk. We sat down with my parents one day, and I remember my dad just pushing and pushing, and he was like, "What's the worst that can happen?" And we really just broke it down. We were like, okay, what's the worst that can happen? We could move to the Sunshine Coast, and then nobody comes to our studio. We spend all this money, and then we move back to Brisbane into my parents' house. Was essentially the worst case scenario. I mean, we didn't have a lot to lose. We had to borrow a whole lot of money, but money's like honey, baby. The bees keep on making it. So we kind of, that's my attitude, definitely not my husband's. But yeah, we sort of looked at everything that could happen and what the ramifications were of that. We knew that we wouldn't be homeless, and we would always have food on the table, given the amazing support that we had from both of our families. And yeah, my dad was just like, jump, just do it. Worst case scenario, it's a business course. It's a degree in business, real life business experience, and you can learn from it. So with that in mind, we packed our bags. We moved into my sister's apartment in Markoola, and at a week's notice, and with our $4,000, and we started looking for locations. And we knew that our location was the absolute most important part. So we really held on to that mentality of what's the worst that can happen, because in so many situations we get so caught up on a decision, we get decision fatigue, and sometimes just looking at what's the worst that can happen is really helpful. One of the times that I did this recently, or a couple of years ago, was I was looking at buying a new car. We just had a baby and we wanted to buy a new car. I wanted to be an SUV soccer mum vibe. And it was during COVID. So it was sort of 2021. And we were looking at cars, and we were looking at some that were a bit newer and then some that were a bit older. And we were so stuck on this car situation. Seems silly, but at the time it felt like a big deal. And we just ran through what's the worst that can happen. So we were like, okay, the worst that can happen here is that we buy a car, we overspend, and then our business falls down because of COVID, and then we have to sell the car, and then we don't have the car anymore, right? So then we were like, okay, we're just going to get the car. So yeah, we've kind of used this process all throughout, and it's definitely something I use within my mentoring, but it's definitely a tool that you can use as well. Is just like really exploring, what's the worst case scenario in a situation. So with that in mind, I'd really love to transition into talking about some tips that I have for starting a business. And the transition is seamless because my first tip is that with great risk comes great reward. I don't remember who quoted that right now, but, I think that definitely falling on that kind of mentality of, with anything that we do in this life, everything we do is a risk to some extent, whether it's a risk of our time, a risk financially, a risk with our heart. Everything that we do kind of requires a risk, and there's always reward attached as well. It could go right, it could go wrong. I am definitely a big enabler of following your dreams and starting a business. However, I also think that we have to sort of do our due diligence and really understand exactly what it is that we are risking. So I guess that I've kind of jotted down a few points to this. So the first thing that I would suggest doing your due diligence is like really looking into the industry. So what is the industry that you're passionate about and what's happening within the industry? So for me in the Pilates industry, 5 or 6 years ago when this idea was born and we were getting it all ready and set up, we looked at what was happening overall in the industry. So we looked at internationally what was happening in the Pilates space. Obviously, we know now that Pilates is very, very on trend and there's lots of studios opening up, which is absolutely amazing. At the time, that wasn't really the case. There was a few studios around and Pilates was definitely picking up in other states. So I always look at other countries and then other states in Australia. I could see that in Melbourne and Sydney that people were really on board with all of the Pilates stuff. There was Pilates studios popping up, people were really taking it on. There was lots of celebrities getting on board and there was lots of credibility in the industry. Secondly, I also looked at the rise of the boutique fitness studio. So looking at F45s at the time and, other sort of CrossFit style gyms, people were happy to pay that boutique pricing, which was around, $50 a week on average. So I looked at those two things in the industry and I thought people in the Sunshine Coast are probably interested in doing the same as what people in Brisbane and Sydney are doing and Melbourne. And I kind of was like, okay, yeah, I can see that this is an idea that would work. And I think that, people on the Sunshine Coast deserve just as much resources and facilities as these other places. And I could really see that would work. The second thing that I would recommend looking at within that first point is the demand. So the demographic, what is that like? Are the clients within that demographic someone who's going to get involved with what you have to offer? For me personally, every time I've started a studio or a business, it has been because it is something that I demand, that I want. So for me, every time I was visiting the Sunshine Coast, because it was a lot, my husband and I had a van and we used to come up here to escape the rat race. There was never a Pilates studio for me to go to. There wasn't somewhere that I could recommend to my clients in Brisbane of where they could go to if they're on holidays, or I had a few people who are moving up here. And so I was like, okay, there's definitely a demand for it. And then within that demand, we need to look at, like, what does your competition look like? What is everyone else doing? I'd never like to focus on competition, but obviously it's very smart to do your due diligence on what everyone else is doing, what is working for them or seems to be working for them, and then go from there. So really nailing down your demographic. Who exactly are you trying to speak to? Who are you trying to draw in? Are those people where you're going? The third thing is the location. So what else is available in your location, and what's the population like? What's the density of the population? So a little bit more of those kind of things that you can look at that will tell you, okay, well, how many people are actually in this area, in this town? Is my product or service, an online service, so it doesn't really matter? How far are people really willing to travel? So for us, that was a consideration. We looked at like the density in certain areas in the Sunshine Coast. We looked at how far we thought people were willing to travel to come and do their Pilates. And then we made sort of a informed decision based on that. So 3 things that I would suggest really taking your time and do your due diligence before taking that leap. So absolutely, I think if you have a dream, follow it. However, just do so with a little bit of informed decision making, I guess. Really do your due diligence. So tip 2, know your financials. Now, I just want to make it really clear before I move into this that I am not an accountant. I am not a financial advisor, and this is not my scope of practice. However, this is exactly why I talk about this, because I have people to do all those things and to advise me, but I also know and understand what's going on because it's a really important part of your business. It's important to know exactly what your break even is. Like, it sounds simple, but knowing what your break even is really important because you know exactly where you're shooting. So in a Pilates studio, for example, we know how many clients based on what our rent is and what all of our overheads are and what our instructors cost and management, everything like that. We know how many clients we need in order to pay the bills and to start paying off the loan. We then know how many clients we would need on average to start drawing a profit. And I feel like that's just really empowered knowledge because we can aim towards those goals. Just moving through this without knowing and just going, oh, my accountant knows, is not good enough. And I say that with love, but I promise that you're going to feel more empowered if you know exactly what is required from you to kind of make this work. When you're looking at your financials, it also empowers you to make sure that your business structure is correct. This takes us into tip 3, which is really create a business structure that works for you. So when you're sort of mixing the financials with the business structure, if you do your financials and you realize that the number of clients that you need to break even or the number of clients that you need to draw a certain salary or a certain amount of dividends is unrealistic, then you need to find a way to pivot your business. You need to find a way to change your idea and change the structure of your business so that it is achievable, because there is no point in going into a business and starting a business that's not going to make you profit or it's not going to break even. Your costs are going to be more than your revenue. So with that being said, you need to create a business structure that aligns with your desired lifestyle. So look at exactly what it is that you want, but then also look at the business structure in regards to your lifestyle. So when I look at a studio or I talk to studio owners, and I'm only relating to in this fitness industry so much because that's obviously the industry that I'm in, but this sort of relates to a lot of service-based businesses. I always ask people what kind of lifestyle they want because everyone's decision on that is different. For me personally, I wanted to create a business that I would be able to step away from at some point, and still have it running and doing well, and still withhold all of the values and things that I kind of feel are important, and also achieve the overall outcome, which is impact, the greatest amount of impact on people in terms of their physical health, and mental health. So basically, when I talk about a Pilates studio with someone, I talk to them about how big the studio is going to be. Is it going to have 2 beds? Is it going to have 4 beds, 6 beds, 8 beds, 10 beds, 12 beds, 14 beds, etc.? Because there is a difference. If you open a Pilates studio with 6 beds, realistically, in order to earn your salary, you're going to be needing to teach most of the classes. The financial amount that you can get from 6 people paying you for a class versus what you need to pay another instructor to do it doesn't match up. So you would have to be teaching majority of the classes, probably 3/4 of the classes. So this means that it would be quite hard for you to get away, to take a holiday. Obviously doable, but it just means that need to be a lot more hands-on, which is totally fine. Some people love to do that, and that's where their spark is, and that's where their area of genius is to be a lot more hands-on within their business, working in their business, and that's just one way to do it. Versus if you did a studio that was perhaps 10, 12 or 14 machines, you would be able to afford to pay an instructor to run most of the classes, or instructors to run most of the classes, and also potentially, a manager of some sort with time, which is what I've done. So I'm able to continue running my business in a way that I feel is very aligned, but I'm also able to step away from my business and work on my business from a different perspective. For me, this really hits my area of genius because I love working on my business. My background is marketing, and I just love being the visionary and being able to think of ideas and put them into place rather than spending my time instructing. I love Pilates, and I love instructing when I do it every so often, but it's not something that I feel passionate about doing on a week-to-week basis at a very high capacity. So that's where I sort of think, with the business structure, it's something you really need to consider, exactly how that structure is going to be, and really looking at it from the start is important. Being really clear on exactly how you want it to be is important, because you can it's easier to flow through if you think of it from the start, set it up right at the start, and then move from there. All right, so into tip 4 now. We love to keep it simple, keep it niche, stay in that area of genius. And what I mean about this is that we can't be everything for everyone. And this is actually really relevant in our personal lives as well, but also in our business life. We have to be ourselves and really focus on what we're good at. I have this amazing mentor friend who started a business about 10 years ago. And when she launched her business, it was a product-based business. She launched one amazing piece. It was a clothing brand that was super flattering on lots of different people. And then she put all of her energy into that piece, marketing that piece, getting it out there. And it was an absolute smashing success. We have done the same with our studios as well. Sometimes I feel like adding in spin bikes into my studio because I'd really love a spin class. Or sometimes I feel like adding in boxing or doing outdoor boot camps or lots of different things. However, my husband always reins me in, and sometimes I rein myself in, because what we decided at the start is that we are a Pilates studio. Our focus at Inflow is Pilates. Yes, at some of our studios we do have mat Pilates, bar and yoga, but if someone came into our studio and they were talking to me and they were like, I really want a good yoga studio, I would send them down the road, because we are not a yoga studio. We are a Pilates studio. And so if they're specifically looking for that, then, I really think that they should go to somewhere that specifically gives them that. And so I think sometimes keeping it simple keeps it really clean, clear, and it really means that you can be the best in the area that you choose to focus on, rather than being, mediocre across a lot of different areas. And another example of this was this other amazing woman I used to work with, and she had these huge, beautiful, big ideas. And she was great at, starting the process of executing them. However, because she had so many different things on the go within her space, everything was done at maybe 60%. So people didn't show up for things that she was running, even though the content and the value was amazing. And yeah, it was just a really big lesson for me in, okay, keep it simple. What are we doing? What are we trying to sell? What are we providing? Where is our impact? What is the why? Like, really zone in on that. Obviously, I'm very passionate about that point. All right. So my fifth point is your launch matters. With your business, when you launch your product or your service or your course or whatever it is, your launch of that thing, your announcement and your launch is going to be the time when you have the highest amount of momentum. So that part of it really matters, because you want to lead up and find a way in the lead up to that launch to make sure that it is wildly successful, because it's going to be like I said, the time that has the most momentum. It's something new, it's something shiny. People are going to want to try it, and you only get one chance. So sometimes you get two chances, but you only get one chance at launching, and you also often only get one chance in people's minds. So what I mean about this is that when someone comes and tries a class at the studio on our open day, for example, if they love that class, they're likely to come back. If they don't love that class, even though it might just be the instructor or something stressful happened at the studio that day or something like that, they probably won't come back. And even in 3 years, someone might mention to them about the studio and they go, oh, I tried a class there once. It wasn't really for me. Something wasn't quite right. So my point is that our launch is so important. We want our space or our product to be like a busy restaurant. You know that feeling when you walk past a set of restaurants and one of them's really busy and one of them's really empty, and we don't know why? We want to go to the busy one, but we do. It's because they've nailed the marketing, probably nailed the launch, and they have that kind of under wraps. For us at our studios, it's so important that we build up to that launch and that we launch with a bang, because it means that it takes the pressure off us, that we know that we've got people signed up, that we're going to be able to pay the bills. So it takes that energy away. But secondly, it means that our classes are going to be full or somewhat full, and it's going to give that busy restaurant feeling. It's going to give that feeling that people really want to come and work out with us and be in that energy of those other people and, be in a full class. So it's super important to really consider your launch, create a marketing plan that leads up to your launch, and really bring the energy for that launch, because, it really, really matters. So those are my 5 tips. I have absolutely loved sharing them with you, and I am so happy to hear about all of your ideas, or if you have any questions, I would love for you to slide into my DMs on my Instagram, which will be in the show notes. If you want me to dive deeper into any of these areas, I would love to. I'm honestly so passionate about it. I would love to hear your feedback or anything you'd like me to dive a little bit deeper into. So just find me over on Instagram, and I am always here for a voice note or a message to kind of help you get on that path of following your dreams. So thank you for listening. I had so much fun. I cannot wait for next week's episode, and I will see you all then.